Hi everybody, my name is Megan West. I'm the Director of Forensics here at Cypress Bay High School in Florida. And I'm extremely excited to be doing the September-October Champion Briefs topic analysis for public forum debate. Before we get into the actual topic itself and talking about some arguments and some strategies there, I do want to give you a couple of ideas on the fact that it is the first 2-month public forum topic that we've seen ever with public forum. I think for you as debaters, that means a couple of things. First and foremost, what that means for you is that your evidence needs to last longer. That means that things such as briefs, and I'm not just plugging here for champion briefs, but things such as extensive amounts of material on the topic is only going to benefit you to make sure that you're not reusing the same cards, the same pieces of evidence, and that by the end of October, when we're all at wherever we are, that we are not using the same exact arguments, the same things that we've been using all year, because a lot of times public forum debaters do kind of wear things out by the time you get to the end of the month, and the 2 months are certainly going to make that a little bit more of a challenge. So that's kind of a challenge to you. The second thing I think you need to consider in terms of a September-October topic is really twofold, and it's definitely connected. The first in this second area is the fact that means you have 2 months for a public forum topic. And the latter part of that idea is that it means you have 2 months of a public forum topic at the beginning of the year. So I would try new things. I'd encourage you to take some risks. There are a lot of intricacies in terms of topicality in the way that the words in the resolution work together to make some really interesting and unique arguments. So I am sincerely and empathetically challenging you to come up with a variety of different strategies that you can maybe try in September at some of the first tournaments out of the gate. And then utilize throughout the next couple of months to your advantage with a lot of time to have in one public forum topic. And I think it'll be interesting to see what that happens and where that gets us as an activity. That being said, let's jump into the topic itself. As you should know already, or you may not, but the topic that the NFL has given us is, and I want to read it so it's correct, a unilateral military force by the United States is justified to prevent nuclear proliferation. And like I mentioned a second ago or hinted at, I think one of the main points of this topic that's extremely significant is the different words and their definitions and the way you're going to be defining things. Now, I'm not advocating that you define all of these words in observations or framework at the top of a case. But what I do think is that you and your partner and your coach or your team need to have a really solid understanding of how you're defining unilateral, how you're defining nuclear proliferation, how you're defining justified, and kind of getting into the way that all of the different interpretations of these words are really going to manifest themselves in a debate round. So that's how I want this topic analysis to function, is to tell you my perspectives on a few ways that each of those different definitions can work, and hopefully that's a really good place for you to start that extensive research hunt that has to last you 2 months that I was talking about a minute ago. So first and foremost, unilateral. The term unilateral obviously means acting alone, right? So the United States would be acting alone to end or prevent nuclear proliferation. And what that really does is a couple of things. First, it indicates that the United States would have to have the power, the money, the ability to do that. And that's something that can be debated, right? You can obviously have a framework at the top of the case that says that the United States doesn't have to be able to do it, but that they should do it, or that they're justified in doing it, which we'll get to again in a second. But the idea of if the United States can actually, without the help of another country, without the support of Israel, or without the support of other players in the Middle East, go into a country that is proliferating and do something productive, I guess, especially if we're actually going to provide some type of solvency burden on the affirmative. But the second thing that the idea of unilateral actually impacts is the fact that it doesn't happen very often. So even if we could or have the capability of doing it, I think it's worth it to you to go back through and look at the way that the United States has acted in the past unilaterally and ways that that has potentially been successful or unsuccessful, whether that's in terms of nation building or even just acting, to prevent some type of nuclear materials from being shipped somewhere in the middle of the ocean, which is a pretty recent occurrence that we've had in a few different scenarios. So I think you need to not only understand if we're capable of it and if that's something that should be up for debate, but like I said, secondly, when and how we've done that and the precedent for the United States acting unilaterally, which, like I mentioned, isn't something that happens extremely frequently. And, even if we have the support of the UN, that sometimes can mean, in most definitions, that we are not acting unilaterally, because there's obviously a body of countries that would it be, even if not financially or physically supporting, maybe even emotionally or soft power diplomatically supporting such a decision. The second word that I think is extremely important in the resolution is justified. And as a former LD debater, which granted that was over a decade ago, the idea of this moral debate in public forum is really compelling to me. And I think that it's something that a lot of PF debaters are afraid of, but I think it can really be useful in terms of developing some actual impacts in the round. So if the United States can be a moral actor, and if you debated the moral actors topic previously, you understand a little bit of this grasp. But the idea of whether or not the United States should act morally or can actually have some type of higher responsibility to act is certainly indicated by the word justified in the resolution. So are we just in terms of, is it an equal or opposite reaction? Are we just in terms, is it our role or is it our place to do it? But even further, are we justified, as in, is it going to benefit us, or some type of really simple cost-benefit analysis between the impacts that this will have on the United States, the rest of the world, or the country in which we would be intervening? Third, my favorite topic, or my favorite word, in the topic is prevent. And this is something that, working at National Debate Forum this summer as the public forum curriculum coordinator, we talked about a lot with all of our staff and all of our campers. So if you were there, hello again. But you heard us discuss this. The idea of prevent really by definition means that you need to keep something from happening, right? If I'm going to prevent cancer, I'm going to keep cancer from happening. But in terms of states in the Middle East or elsewhere that are actually already nuclear proliferating, the term prevent could mean that we have to shut them down completely, or it could mean that we need to stop them from producing or proliferating further. So this kind of gets into a really interesting debate here as to whether or not we are justified in this action, but really more importantly, if that action can stop the proliferation altogether, or if we're justified to go into these countries, unilaterally intervene, and maybe it's a country that's not even proliferating, just like putting on sunscreen to prevent cancer or skin cancer would actually have similar impacts and similar ramifications. But when you put the whole clause together, justified to prevent, the other idea that comes to mind that we've discussed a lot over the summer is if we act in the best interest of preventing, right? If the United States acts unilaterally in an attempt to prevent, does that mean that we've accomplished something, even if it absolutely doesn't prevent any other further proliferation? And I think that's also a really interesting point. So there's a lot of multiple world scenarios going on here, and that's why I think framework is going to be important. And like I mentioned earlier, the definitions of all of these different terms and your various interpretations are equally important as something that you need to consider. But the final part of the resolution that is obviously significant and the center of the resolution is nuclear proliferation and what exactly nuclear proliferation entails. There's a lot of studies and a lot of areas of thought that believe that nuclear proliferation can actually constitute as nuclear energy. Personally, and if I'm in the back of the room, I think that's a pretty hard argument to sell, right? There are a lot of benefits to nuclear proliferation, and proliferation at its very core generally means to expose something or to grow something that's usually not positive, right? And proliferation, when paired with the term weapons, is almost always connotatively and denotatively a negative thing. So nuclear proliferation in terms of maybe terrorists acquiring these weapons or taking it across borders, and any other means in which countries are actually creating or producing uranium hexafluoride and using them to build a nuke, which we know a lot of countries have the capability of, and a lot of countries that even maybe just have the pieces, but that could have a nuke by, Friday if they really wanted one, such as North Korea. It's very difficult to determine or to define nuclear proliferation as anything except creating more nuclear weapons that would threaten their neighbors and arguably the rest of the world. But again, that's something that I think you need to consider with your partner, with your coach, and the research that you find in terms of what exactly nuclear proliferation is. And again, pairing it with the word prevent to determine if preventing it means stopping proliferation that's already occurring or simply preventing it from happening. So a lot of moving parts in this resolution, and I think that's part of what makes it really interesting. Strategically, as a whole, other than these moving parts, like I said, I think there are ways that topicality can function, and obviously I'm not encouraging you to call them topicality, but I am encouraging you to question your opponents on exactly how they're defining a word, maybe why the warrant for that word is being used, or that definition. So is it more educational to define nuclear proliferation as nuclear energy? Maybe, right? Is it more common for us to define prevent as to preemptively stop something from happening if it's not already? Maybe. Talk to some policy debaters or look up some different standards for topicality online and try to have some warrants for the way you're defining these terms. But also, don't be afraid to dive into a real world versus hypothetical debate. And I think that's another strategy that I would encourage you to at least test the waters with early on in the topic. You know, is there a time when this is actually going to happen? Like I mentioned earlier in terms of unilateral military force. If that happens in a hypothetical world, could that be beneficial? Well, potentially, but what does that world look like? And are there real world impacts? And I've been struggling for a while with public forum kind of going on this side road away from ripped from the headlines topics. And you can't get a topic that's more ripped from the headlines than this. So I really sincerely appreciate it. But I do encourage all of you to play with it and use it to its full potential in terms of all of the different scenarios that can happen, real world versus hypothetical world, topicalities, and various strategies with all of the inner workings of the extremely exciting, more fun in the Middle East that we get to debate about for the next 2 months. So I wish you lots of luck. I hope this at least gave you some things to think about, and I look forward to talking to many of you again soon. Thanks.